Hashtag the fall of the Soviet Union. The empire of red shadows snow fell silently across Soviet Union as the red banners waved above Moscow like tired ghosts. For decades, the Soviet Union had stood as one of the most feared superpowers on Earth, a nation forged through revolution, war, sacrifice, and iron control. From the frozen forests of Siberia to the factories of Ukraine, from the mountains of Central Asia to the streets of East Berlin, the hammer and sickle ruled over millions. To the world, it looked immortal. But empires rarely collapse in a single explosion. Sometimes, they freeze to death slowly. It began in the ashes of revolution. After the fall of Imperial Russia in 1917, chaos consumed the land. Hunger spread across villages. Civil war drowned cities in blood. But from the darkness emerged a new vision, a communist state where workers would rule and equality would replace kings. The Bolsheviks seized power. Factories roared to life. Massive steel plants rose from empty wastelands. Railways stretched endlessly across snow-covered plains. And under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union transformed into an industrial giant feared by the world. But fear came with a terrible cost. Millions vanished into labor camps. Entire families disappeared in the middle of the night. Citizens whispered instead of speaking. The state watched everything. Yet despite the terror, the Soviet Union grew stronger. Then came the greatest war in human history. When World War II erupted, Nazi armies stormed deep into Soviet territory, burning villages and destroying entire cities. The invaders reached the gates of Moscow itself. The winter was merciless. Bodies froze beneath the snow. But the Soviet people refused to surrender. At Battle of Stalingrad, hell unfolded street by street. Soldiers fought among ruins, smoke, and frozen corpses. Mothers buried children beneath shattered buildings, while artillery thundered endlessly above them. By the end of the war, over 20 million Soviet citizens were dead. But the Soviet Union emerged victorious, and from the ruins, it became a superpower. The world entered the Cold War. On one side stood the United States. On the other stood the Soviet Union. Two giants, two nuclear empires staring at each other across the planet. The Soviets launched satellites into space, built nuclear missiles powerful enough to destroy cities, controlled Eastern Europe through fear and military force. To millions, communism seemed unstoppable. The Red Empire had reached its peak, but beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The economy was dying. Factories produced mountains of useless goods. Food shortages became common. Citizens stood in endless lines for bread, milk, and meat. The government hid the truth behind propaganda posters and military parades. People smiled for cameras while their apartments crumbled around them. And then came the war in Afghanistan. In 1979, Soviet troops marched into Afghanistan expecting a quick victory. Instead, they entered a nightmare. Mountains swallowed soldiers whole. Helicopters burned in the sky. Young conscripts returned home in coffins, sealed shut by the government. The war drained money, morale, and faith in the Soviet system. At the same time, the nuclear arms race with America consumed billions more. The empire was bleeding slowly, and everyone could feel it. Then came a man who tried to save it, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader in 1985 and introduced reforms called glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring. For the first time in decades, people could speak more freely, but truth is dangerous in an empire built on silence. Citizens began questioning everything. Why were they poor? Why were soldiers dying abroad? Why were store shelves empty? Why did the government lie? The fear that once held the Soviet Union together began to disappear, and once fear vanished, the empire started falling apart. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments collapsed one by one. Crowds filled the streets. Statues of Soviet leaders were torn down. Then came the moment the world would never forget. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall shattered before cheering crowds. East Germans crossed freely into the West for the first time in decades. The Iron Curtain was breaking, and Moscow could no longer stop it. Inside the Soviet Union itself, republics demanded independence. Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, the empire was splitting apart from within. Then, in August 1991, hardline communists attempted a coup against Gorbachev. Tanks rolled into Moscow. Citizens prepared for bloodshed, but the people no longer feared the old system. The coup collapsed within days, and with it, so did the Soviet Union. On December 25, 1991, the red Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the final time. No massive battle, no final explosion, just silence. An empire that once terrified the world disappeared overnight. 15 independent nations emerged from its ruins. Millions woke up in a country that no longer existed. Factories closed, soldiers abandoned bases, statues crumbled. The dream of a communist superpower faded.